completing the Q&A session, and without further ado, after apologizing for this delay, now we will continue with the last speaker for the morning session, Dr. Christina Nellist, who is an Orthodox theologian focusing on animal suffering and human soteriology. And she is a co-founder and president of the PanOrthodox Concern for Animals charity. Dr. Nellist, you have the floor for the next 20 minutes.
Και κάποια προβλήματα με τη σύνδεση στο ίντερνετ. Δεν αποχώρησε λόγω διαμαρτυρίας της καθυστέρησης.
I think she has some internet connection problems. She didn't abandon us in protest of the delay.
Επειδή δυστυχώς δεν φαίνεται...
Unfortunately, it seems that we won't be able to resolve this technical issue, so we will give the floor to Nikos Asproulis, the Deputy Director of the Academy of Theological Studies, so that he can read the text that Ms. Nellist has already sent to us. Mr. Asproulis, the floor to you.
Λοιπόν, ο τίτλος της εισήγησης είναι The Animal-Based Diet, Important...
The title of the speech is The Animal-Based Diet, Important Consideration.
I apologize for not being able to be with you today, even online. But I'm also presenting at the Dietary Conference here in the UK. As someone who has been teaching on the detrimental impacts of our food choices since the 80s, let me begin by saying that I am extremely grateful to the Volos Academy for hosting an Orthodox conference on this theme. I also congratulate them for selecting participants who will speak to the various theological, ethical, scientific, and practical issues relating to this subject. Because I have lived in so many different countries, continents, and cultures, I tend to think globally. It is reasonable to suggest, however, that most people on this planet do not think in global terms, but rather in terms of what happens in their homes, locality, and nation. Climate instability is, however, a global crisis, and what happens in other parts of the world directly impacts us nationally and locally, and vice versa. Unfortunately, we are only now beginning to sufficiently understand the consequences of decades of the global misuse of God's good creation. Sadly, which many do understand the corresponding effort and sacrifice needed to deal with increasing temperatures, air pollution, flash flooding and droughts, acidization and depletion of our oceans and increasing food insecurity, indeed life on the planet, many others, both locally and globally, are either still unaware or simply unwilling to make the necessary changes in their lives. It remains, as Philip Serrat commented several decades ago, as if we are in some sort of collective psychosis as we walk to the edge of the cliff. I am a co-founder of the Orthodox Concern for Animals faith group. Our aim is to reduce the suffering of animals and in so doing, our environments and the peoples of this good and very good creation, because, as the Father insists, everything is connected. The abuse and exploitation of animals has the same origin as the abuse to people and their environments. When we ignore any form of cruelty, abuse and exploitation, we allow all three to grow elsewhere in the world. My colleagues and I research our patristic teachings. We listen to our contemporary fathers and hierarchs and apply said teachings to the problems of today. This is consistent with Orthodox tradition throughout these past 2,000 years. We also read the scientific research on climate predictions, the scientific reports on the detrimental health implications of our dietary choices. the numerous undercover investigations showing the horrific abuse to animals within the animal food production industries, and the numerous scientific reports on the nexus of issues associated with the diet, such as the inherent insufficiency and wastage, soil water degradation, pollution, and its unsustainable water consumption. It is rare, however, for us to inform our audiences of the horrific consequences for animals of our food choices, because our aim and ethos is not to harm any of God's creatures. And when you see pictures of the reality for animals, we are raped and killed for human food, it is often truly horrific. On this occasion, however, when so many others are talking on the subject of food, it does not allow me space to speak for the animals, who are so frequently omitted from our theological or philosophical discussions. However, I will be brief and generalize the suffering of the individual creature involved. Okay. Για ρώτα την μήπως είναι... να διαπέσω, θα απαντήσω σε ερωτήσεις μόνο.
Να καλωσορίσουμε την κυρία Nellist.
Let's welcome Ms. Nellist. The connection is reestablished, I think. I don't know whether you agree. Could Mr. Asproulis continue reading out your text and then you can answer the questions at the end?
If you can see me, which I cannot see you at present, yes, please, Nikos, continue. And with God's grace, I'll be able to answer at the end. Yes, please.
So,
Thank you.
I continue reading the presentation. Because of the nexus of problems associated with our food choices, we are also involved in issues of justice and rights. As stated, I have been teaching for many decades on deforestation and the expansion of mega farms for the mass production of animal-based food, which has also caused violent conflicts and death in indigenous territories in various regions of South America, Indonesia, and Africa. This is one of the reasons why I was invited by the Middle East Council of Churches and Association of Theological Institutes in the Middle East to be the Orthodox voice on their symposium entitled Ecumenical Perspectives on Climate Justice. So let's start with the first part of this presentation, after the introductory remarks. Industrialization and consumption. Being old allows me an element of hindsight and the ability to view and analyze a situation over the past decades. And I conclude that key issues in the debate around food in the Anthropocene is the connected issues of the industrialization and overconsumption of animal-based foods. I am sure others have and will discuss this in more detail, but my first key point is that today, in practical terms, it is essentially a numbers game. What do I mean by that? I think of our individual diets and probably conclude that it is okay in climate terms. I do not make that much difference. The point I wish to stress here is that there is no one I. There are approximately 8.5 billion I on the planet, and every one of us as individuals create a huge collective market. The majority of the 8.5 billion people have at least one meal a day that contains animal meat or dairy products like milk, yogurt, and cheese. And if the 8.5 billion have 2 or 3 animal-based meals a day, this number can rise to a staggering 25.5 billion animal-based meals a day. The number of animals needed to satisfy that collective daily demand is enormous. Now, do the math and calculate the yearly total, and hopefully you will understand how impactful our individual dietary choices for us, the animals and the environment, both locally and globally. The number of animals needed to satisfy this yearly demand for animal-based food is the trillions, and thus what you, I eat makes a huge collective impact. And if we are not conscious of that impact, and even if we are not conscious of that impact, let us examine the trend. Since the middle of the last century, our consumption of animal-based food has drastically increased. In the last 2 decades alone, meat production and consumption have increased by 53% worldwide, with beef, pork, and chicken accounting for almost 90% of the total. These animals are mainly reared on industrial farms run by a small number of large transnational corporations, which has led to a high concentration of the meat production, processing, and marketing sectors. In terms of justice and rights, these corporations have taken advantage of globalization to move their operations to poorer countries, where they capitalize on weaker labor and environmental standards and lower production costs to maximize their profit. The profitability of this cooperation is also underpinned by various subsidies and protectionist measures, dare I say the word tariffs, implemented by governments in the global north, allowing them to maintain artificially low prices on the world market, which encourages the overproduction of meat, leading to the displacement of small local producers in many regions of the global south. In parallel, global aquaculture production has tripled in the last 2 decades due to the intensification of farming systems, especially for species such as salmon, shrimp, and tilapia. This is made possible by the use of processed feed to accelerate growth, along with antibiotics and chemicals to control disease. These methods have raised serious public health concerns, such as antimicrobial resistance, already acknowledged in the large animal production model, together with the contamination of aquatic ecosystems and eutrophication caused by organic waste and uneaten food. Just one example from Ecuador is the shrimp industry, which has destroyed approximately 70% of the country's mangroves and thus disrupted sedimentation and water flow patterns, essential for their regeneration. As a result, key ecosystem services, such as carbon sequestration, are compromised, exacerbating the effects of climate change in the region. To summarize this point, industrialization models and overconsumption of animal-based food raised concern about food sustainability, animal welfare, environmental and social impacts, especially in highly biodiverse regions where the expansion of meat production industries is threatening local ecosystems and justice for indigenous peoples. Let's turn now to the animal-based diet, inefficient and wasteful. The next key point is that the animal-based diet is an extremely inefficient and wasteful use of our land, water and crops. And again, there are associated justice and rights issues for the poorest communities. The UNFAO states that, quote, almost a third of the total food value of global crop production is lost by processing it through inefficient livestock systems, meaning giving it to animals so that you can eat the animals. According to the science, animals convert the carbohydrates and protein contained in the grain into a significantly smaller quantity of energy and protein than humans could have gained by directly consuming the grain. For example, for every 100 calories of human edible cereals fed to animals, only 17 to 30 calories, meaning less than 1/3 of the original potential energy, enter the human food chain. And for every 100 grams of grain protein fed to animals, only 43 grams, less than half, enter the human food chain as meat or dairy. Similarly, 70% of the wild fish used for animal feeds could instead be eaten directly by humans. Animals only contribute positively to food production when they convert materials that humans cannot consume into food that humans can eat, meaning if fed on grass, on marginal, non-crop land, byproducts, crop residues, and unavailable food waste. According to the IPCC and other groups, aquaculture and livestock dietary components, such as forage fish, may also compromise crops that provide essential nutrients for low-income households, increasing nutritional insecurity in regions of sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and Latin America. End of quote. To summarize this point, this highly insufficient food system is leading to a net drain on the world's food supply, causing food insecurity and inequity. Studies have shown that if the cereals used for animal feed were instead used for direct human consumption, they could feed an additional 3.5 to 4 billion people each year. To combat food insecurity and malnutrition, available resources need to be used more efficiently and more justly, and we, you, I, have a part to play in this. Unless you research this type of information, however, it is unlikely that you will know this. This leads me to my next consideration, that of the disinformation and misdirection. Next part, fake news, disinformation, and misdirection. The tactics used by the tobacco industry in the 20th century, that is disinformation, misdirection, in order to create confusion and doubt about the link between smoking and cancer, meaning the science, is now being used by big oil and big ag to confuse us about whether climate science is real or as bad as the science tells us. How good the animal-based is for our health and how well treated and happy the animals are. These tactics include deliberate attempts to hide the horrendous realities of multiple species of animals and ecosystems across the world in order to maintain their profits. Two examples of this are the introduction of AG gag laws and dishonest labeling. Research and investigative journalists have proven that these companies have been doing this for decades. AG gag laws, agricultural gag, are anti-whistleblower laws and apply within the animal agriculture industry. They typically forbid undercover filming of or photography of activities on farms without the consent of the owner. More particularly, they target whistleblowers who alert the public of various forms of animal abuse. Although these laws originate in the United States, they have also begun to appear elsewhere, such as in Australia and Canada. The proliferation of AG gag laws, it is argued, are intended primarily to hide the animal abuse by the agricultural industry from the public and also violate the right to freedom of speech. Another simple but effective example of misleading the public is the dishonest labeling of products from low welfare intensive farms. Many labels continue to use terms like farm fresh, and or display images of happy animals in an idyllic countryside on products that were factory farmed. This is detrimental not only to animal welfare, but also for consumer information and choice. My final key point is entitled, "There is no flourishing in death." Now let's turn to this final consideration. Much of what happens in animal food production and the killing of trillions of animals each year is hidden from us. In many countries, animal rearing and slaughter is now situated far away from the local population. I recently gave a presentation in Oxford on the work of Tolstoy entitled Tolstoy, Animsa, Animals and Anarchy, to be published later this year. In his foreword, in his friend Zetskov's work, The First Step, he describes a scene from his visit to a slaughterhouse. "I have seen animals being killed around the world, and for billions, perhaps trillions of them, their suffering, both physical and psychological, is still as that portrayed by Tolstoy." On the first occasion, when I lived in the Seychelles, I began the SPCA and worked closely with the chief veterinary officer. It was explained to me that they kept their pigs on a small island because the pigs are beaten to death, and as this is both terrifying and painful, the pigs give off their high-pitched squeals, which will be too distressing for the humans on the main island of Mai. You might think this is a small island in the Indian Ocean, and this type of action is an isolated one. It is not. 2 weeks ago, a British newspaper exposed similar treatment on one of our biggest pig farms. Piglet tramping is the process of slamming a piglet's head onto a hard surface like concrete in an attempt to kill them. Piglets were left appearing to breathe several minutes later, and others were tamped multiple times as staff had no idea if the bodies were dead or alive, if the babies were dead or alive. Another industry standard stunning method for pigs is the use of high concentration of CO2 gas. Recently, I was sent a report published in the journal Frontiers in Veterinary Science, which concludes that this method is inherently cruel. It causes vast numbers of animals extreme pain and distress before they lose consciousness. On one part of the slaughtering systems for chickens is the use of maceration. This is the process of grinding up alive thousands of one-day-old male chicks because they have no value to the animal food industry. The alternative standard method is to drop them into scalding water. Can you imagine? In our work, we try to remind people that God does not create any of His creatures in order for them to suffer, and that no life is worthless. Conclusion. In conclusion, and in light of all that has been or will be said at this conference, and the science and nexus of problems related to our dietary choices, I end by asking one question for reflection and making one request to our church and academic institutions. The question is thus: once we know of the enormous animal suffering involved in producing the animal-based diet, the shocking insufficiency of feeding food that humans can eat to animals, the injustice and violence to indigenous and local people who try to protect their land or traditional food systems and livelihood from the big ag multinationals, the global environmental damage and its significant impact on climate instability. Once we know all this, are there likely to be soteriological implications for those who continue to create the market of this type of food? And again, because of all that is being said here and elsewhere, I politely ask the church and academic institutions that plant-based food be provided at all church gatherings or academic conferences. There are numerous other occasions throughout the day, week, month, or year for participants and our parishioners to consume animal flesh products if they choose so. In providing a plant-based diet and choosing vegetarian restaurants for our conference meals, the church and institutions would show one compassionate example of how the gap between Orthodox theory and practice can be addressed. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε τον κύριο Ασπρούλη για την ανάγνωση του κειμένου.
Thank you, Mr. Asproulis, for reading out the text, and thank you, Ms. Nellist, for your patience. And now let's open the floor for Q&A. Please, if there are any questions, kindly take the microphone and ask them.
Thank you, Dr. Christine, for your very serious and thought-provoking presentation. I would like to go a little bit further than your suggestion at the end, and I understand that you were talking to churches, but I think that each of us as individuals as well, with a conscience, because in the Protestant tradition that I come from, we talk about individual conscience, not just church conscience. We should seriously consider adopting a plant-based diet at least as much as possible, and question ourselves whether we need to eat so much meat. It's something my wife and I have done for years now, that we challenged ourselves and we decided that we don't need to eat meat, and we eat meat very rarely for the reasons that you've outlined in your talk. So my suggestion would be, at least for anyone here and anyone listening to this, let's examine our own consciences in the light of what we've heard, and think seriously about eating less meat, or perhaps not eat at all. Thank you.
Christine?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Perhaps I could also, just so quickly before my internet goes down again, I just wanted to say something.
Christine, probably you could turn off the video, the camera, so it could be better for the transmission of the audio. Δυστυχώς έχουμε ένα πρόβλημα τεχνικό.
Fortunately, the technical issue still persists, and we cannot listen to Christine's answer.